In the agonizing build-up to Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, I think it's time to embrace Indiana Jones while it still hasn't been ruined. I previously did a video defending Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. A lot of criticisms people make towards it can also apply to other indie movies. Like, for example, this one guy in my comment section went on a rant about how Crystal Skull is racist for overgeneralizing cultures, ignoring that Temple of Doom exists. Someone else made a good point when they said that Crystal Skull was just a movie released at the wrong time. If Temple of Doom and Crystal Skull swapped with each other, the George Lucas haters would be hating on Temple of Doom instead. But since Temple of Doom was a movie released when they were kids, that's why they like it. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is a good movie. I watched it on repeat, just like the other films, and I loved it. I'm sick of the hatred towards Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Hopefully that will change with the Dial of Destiny coming out, but we shouldn't get to that point in the first place. So for this series, I'm going to review the original trilogy, Raiders, Temple of Doom, and Last Crusade. I'm going to critique all three of these films, give my take on them, and so on and so forth. We should embrace the Indiana Jones franchise while it's still good. I also wanted to talk about the Indiana Jones expanded universe at some point, but before that, I should talk about the mainstream stuff first. So some background. The character that would become Indiana Jones was conceptualized by our Lord and Savior George Lucas, who thought up of him as an American competitor to James Bond of sorts. The character's original name was Indiana Smith, but when discussing the idea to Spielberg, he didn't like the name Smith, so George proposed Jones as an alternate surname. Spielberg came on to direct, albeit reluctantly. One of the candidates to play Indiana Jones was Tom Selleck, but due to being really busy with the show Magnum P.I., Spielberg suggested bringing Harrison Ford on. Because of his great performance with Han Solo in A New Hope, and the production stuff he saw with The Empire Strikes Back, George Lucas was against the idea for a fair reason. He didn't want to cast the same actor for different roles all the time, but he eventually agreed. Harrison Ford was a great choice for Indiana Jones. It was also a lucky choice for Harrison Ford personally, because he hates Han Solo, but has a soft spot for Indiana Jones. So luckily for him, one of the two iconic characters he played is someone he likes, which is something to balance out Han Solo, a character he doesn't like. That's more you can say for Alec Guinness as an example. Indiana Jones was heavily inspired by 1930s adventure serials, in which the Nazis were commonly the bad guys. I'm saying the word like that because YouTube doesn't like how it's actually pronounced. So without further ado, let's get into Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. And yes, that's its name. Simply calling it Raiders of the Lost Ark was made before Indy became a franchise. The correct full name is Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Nicknaming it Raiders is fine, but just make sure to get the modern name correct. I say this when I'm annoyed when this movie is always listed the wrong way. It reminds me of the people who still call Episode 4 A New Hope simply Star Wars. It's outdated as hell. Also, I feel I should address something from a previous video. I was sick of people using Lawrence Kasdan as an excuse to discredit George Lucas for his own work. That's why I wanted to set the record straight. Lawrence Kasdan was mostly useless when it came to Star Wars. The best thing he came up with was Yoda's backwards talking. He also helped George structure parts of Return of the Jedi, I guess, but he also came up with a lot of terrible ideas. Link to the video in the description. The only thing that can go against my video is the movie we're talking about today. Lawrence Kasdan wrote the script based on George's and Spielberg's outlines, so I guess that's credit where it's due, but that's really his only contribution to anything as far as I can tell. Lawrence Kasdan, in terms of Star Wars, was incredibly awful when it came to coming up with his own ideas, in which he and J.J. Abrams stole from George in The Force Awakens, and he came up with the most bizarre origin story for Han Solo. Also, it's weird that Kasdan didn't return for Temple of Doom or Last Crusade. Also, remember that George Lucas came up with the story, not Kasdan, so keep that in mind. But without further ado, let's actually talk about Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. The movie has a clever transition from presenting itself as a Paramount picture to showing us a mountain that looks a lot like the Paramount Mountain. Bravo. Anyways, the movie starts in South America, 1936. As I said before in other videos when you think about it, Raiders has an irrelevant opening story-wise, yet it's pivotal to the series because it shows us who Indiana Jones is. I feel the first 10 minutes gives the most substance to the main character in the shortest amount of time. Indiana Jones, again, was designed as an American competitor to James Bond, and I remember George Lucas saying in the Empire of Dreams documentary that you should go into a movie expecting it to be a total failure and not expecting to make 50 sequels. As such, showing us a bit of Indiana Jones before the main story starts was actually quite clever. It's basically a mini adventure designed to introduce us to the character. In the intro, you can piece together that Indiana Jones is on an expedition with some less than trustworthy characters. One of them is Satipo, played by one Alfred Molina in his first big film role. If that name doesn't click right away, let me give you a reminder.
These things have turned you into something you're not. Don't listen to them.
It was my dream.
Sometimes, to do what's right, we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most. Even our dreams.
Yeah, that's right. It's one of the most iconic villains in the comic book genre of movies. It's cool that he had a noteworthy role in another critically acclaimed movie. Anyways, while not explicitly said in the movie, in the novelization, these guys are guides that Indy hired to assist him with navigating the jungle. But little does he know that these guys intend to stab him in the back and take the idol from him. Indy's face is not shown for a few minutes while the opening credits roll. They, however, reveal his face in an awesome way. One of the guides, named Barranca in external material, opts to ambush him by pulling out a gun on him. Indy hears the click of the gun, however, and uses his iconic weapon to whip the gun off the dude. And that's where he does his iconic turnaround to the camera. The serious look Harrison Ford gives is so good. Given another guide saw a statue, got scared and ran off, that leaves us with Satipo. Indy and Satipo enter the temple. Despite Satipo's objections that nobody's come out of there alive, but that doesn't stop Indy from going in. Then, of course, a common trope of these movies is born. Creepy crawlies. We've got a scene where some tarantulas are on Indy's back, and he brushes them off. Easy. But when Satipo turns his back, and oh my god, there's so many of them. If this movie and the rest of the series succeeds at anything, it's effective shock value. I hear for this one scene, they put a bunch of male tarantulas on Alfred Molina's back, but they wouldn't budge on moving. So they put a female one on him and they all started moving. Anyways, Indy and Satipo narrowly avoid a trap. Indy, who is incredibly experienced, triggers the light from a safe distance, and we see one of his rivals, Forrestal, was killed by the trap. Indy references how he knew this random deceased character. That's interesting, because I never got onto that despite me watching the movie constantly on repeat when I was younger. This is the sort of movie where you can go back after 20 watches and still find something new about it. The story and the universe is very intricately written. Indiana Jones as a character was well thought out, having a lot of history. Anyways, Indy and Satipo use the whip to swing across a chasm. Indy makes it across just fine, but Satipo has to be caught by Indy. Then, of course, one of the most iconic scenes in this film, the golden idol. We get this great shot of Indy coming out the light and seeing the golden idol a couple of meters away. Just there for the taking. Satipo agrees with me, as he assumes there's no more traps, but Indy stops him, making sure to be extra careful. He digs out a trap and activates it with some wood. The trap activates and shoots an arrow straight at the wood. Indy tells Satipo to step back as he carefully steps towards the golden idol. The tension rises as Indy gets slowly closer and closer to the golden idol. The way it's presented, the idol becomes more and more majestic the closer we are to it. John Williams' score also assists the scene, as Indy gets closer and closer. Indy gets in arm's reach to the idol and is extra careful. He pulls out a weighted bag of sand, intending to swap the idol with the bag of sand, with the hope that the sand will trick the trap system into believing the idol wasn't taken in the first place. Indy, of course, carefully plans out his swiping, and when he takes the idol, it seems that all is good. until the temple starts to shake and goes absolutely mental, like the temple itself is pissed that Indy took the idol. Indy runs fast enough to literally dodge the traps, which is a good way to show us how fast he's running. Satipo of course uses the rope, but it snaps off when it gets to the other side. Satipo pressures Indy to throw the idol in exchange for the whip, but upon doing so, Satipo is like,
Adios, señor.
Hello, Peter.
So yeah, Satipo stabs him in the back and leaves him. Indy is forced to jump across instead, but nearly falls to his death. However, Indy manages to climb up, roll under the closing door and retrieve his whip. Immediately upon doing so, he stumbles across the now dead Satipo who got caught in the traps the moment after ditching Indy. Certainly less heroic than his sacrifice in Spider-Man 2. Anyways, with Satipo dead, Indy needs to start trying to do better. Indy then sees the iconic rolling boulder and tries to outrun it, nearly tripping in the process, before jumping out of the temple. Damn, how do you make so many iconic moments in the first 10 minutes of a movie? This is incredibly impressive from the part of Lucas and Spielberg, and maybe Kasdan too with the one time he was a competent writer. Anyhow, Indy doesn't get to celebrate yet, as all the natives have their primal weapons drawn at him. We see Barranca got caught by the natives. One of the natives pushes him down, and he collapses face first, seeing all the poison darts on his back. What a way to show that this guy was unlucky. Then, we get introduced to one of the main villains, who unapologetically and casually walks over his dead body. This is Belloq, the French rival of Indiana Jones. He greets Indy, telling him he's been outmatched. Now, he has to give up the golden idol. I wouldn't explicitly call Belloq a hateable villain. In fact, I'd say that as a character, he isn't actually that scummy, at least compared to the other villains. Our first impressions of Belloq, however, is a manipulator who swayed the natives to his side and showed up to steal something that Indy rightfully obtained by avoiding all those traps. Indy has to hand over his gun and the idol. Indy remarks how these natives don't know him like he does. Of course, we've got Belloq's famous response.
Yes, too bad. You could warn them. If only you spoke Jovitos.
When Belloq raises the idol in front of all the natives who bow down, Indy seizes the opportunity to escape. Belloq of course signals for the Jovitos to chase after him. So here, we've got our classic escape sequence. We see Indy's escape ride, a plane with his pilot, Jock fishing. Indy comes out, screaming for Jock to start the plane, with the utmost intensity. We see that Jock doesn't start the plane right away, but when we see that Indy's serious, he goes to start the plane. Indy swims to the plane as it takes off, but he isn't able to relax, even when he's in the air, as we see his biggest recurring fear throughout the series: snakes. Yeah. Indy has a phobia of snakes, he hates them. And Jock tries to tell him that it's just his pet snake Reggie. So to sum this intro up, it's excellent. Again, it does a great job of introducing Indiana Jones. It shows us who he is and all of his gimmicks, his bullwhip, his appearance, his fear of snakes, all in the course of the first 10 minutes. A recognizable, iconic character almost instantly. That's a pretty hard thing to do. With that being said though, we should get on with the main plot, which shows us what Indy does when he isn't dodging traps or running away from hostile natives who are blowing darts at him. He's a college professor, in which he teaches archaeology. It's a huge contrast when it comes to what he did in the first 10 minutes. Teaching is different from exploring. Anyhow, Marcus Brody, a pivotal character in the series, although his role in this movie is rather small, informs him about some American agents who want to see him. Basically, it's about those damn Nazis that have popped up around 3 years ago history-wise. Led by a crazy dude named Adolf Hitler. Extremely racist, silly mustache, you know him. Basically, Nazi excavators are looking for the Ark of the Covenant, otherwise the Lost Ark. The agents inform Indy that the Nazis are digging for it outside of Cairo, Egypt. This is perhaps the least memorable part of the movie, arguably. So it's good that it didn't start this way, but establishing the mythology that is going to come full circle is great. I especially like the visual representation of paintings that demonstrate the Ark of the Covenant. It gives what is essentially the MacGuffin a majestic vibe before we've even seen it. All the Indy artifacts have that vibe. Will Dial of Destiny have that? Who knows? What even is a Dial of Destiny anyways? Is that just the title which, just like the sequel trilogy, doesn't mean squat? Probably. Now, a common criticism you could levy at every indie movie are historical inaccuracies. Obviously, I doubt the Nazis found the Lost Ark and shenanigans happened with an American archaeologist, but I'm talking about general stuff. In this movie, anyone who knows about World War II will be confused why American agents are going up to Indy to investigate the Lost Ark. Why the hell don't the British or the French contact him? Why's it gotta be American agents? So we get a final scene with Brody before Indy takes off to go meet his mentor Marion Ravenwood, who lives in Nepal, as he's got a neck piece that ties to the Ark of the Covenant. Marcus shows some concern around the Ark of the Covenant, and Indy tells him that he doesn't believe in magic. Then, of course, Indy goes on his original adventure for the Lost Ark. He boards a plane and heads for Nepal, presumably the Himalayan mountains, which is super damn cold. A small detail when Indy boards the plane is that we get a brief shot of this random guy looking down from reading a magazine, and his stare tells us that he means business. Then, another iconic staple of this movie happens when we get a geographic indicator of the plane's flight from California to Hawaii to Japan, I think, to Nepal. This would be replicated to every other indie movie from my recollection. When we get to Nepal, we are introduced to Marion Ravenwood, who is Abner's daughter. We get an interesting scene of a drinking competition between her and some dude. Gee, this movie has the classic George Lucas trope of foreshadowing. As stuff we're introduced to early is referenced later. Marion is shown to be extremely resilient when it comes to alcohol. She can drink more than enough and keep going. She can easily beat the unnamed opponent, who passes out and wins the drinking game. It's shown to be around night, so everyone is in a wrapping up stage before going home. I love this shot that indicates Indy's shadow. It's here where Indy greets Marion, only to be punched in the face by her. Marion says that she's grown to hate him in the last 10 years since they met. Why? Well, in the movie itself, it's extremely subtle. I've watched this movie a million times, and I was never able to figure it out until someone online described what George Lucas conceptualized from Marion and Indy's rocky relationship. This is where I talk about something that I think everyone dislikes about this movie. And since this movie is considered one of the very best, that's saying something. Marion only hints in the dialogue that Indy had a romantic relationship with her when she was underage. By that, I mean that the movie very loosely hints. It's never made explicitly clear what happened between the both of them. George Lucas has stated via the script, he made this very hidden. It's not spelled out to you, so it's easy to miss. Indy is 37 or 38 when this movie happens, and Marion is 25. So if you piece together the whole story, it's clear that Indy in his 20s had an illegal relationship with Marion. Man, do I feel so dirty for talking about this. When I realized what was going on, it puts an iconic character like Indiana Jones into a whole new light. He did something highly illegal. To be honest, this might be the actual worst writing decision George Lucas made. Realizing that Indy may actually be a child molester would ruin the character for anyone. On the upside, again, it's really subtly told, so most people never pieced it together. So yeah, this is extremely iffy writing. Still though, I don't think George Lucas is a creep, like some people have tried to push. It's one small line of dialogue, and it's not something the movie hammers home in the slightest. Plus, George Lucas, as far as I can tell, admitted to this weird writing decision. But let me tell you, it's nowhere near as bad as this guy when he writes certain characters. Anyways, Indy tries to bargain with Marion for a piece of her father's collection. And it's here where Indy learns that Abner has passed away. Ouch. Still though, Indy tries to give Marion money for the piece that he needs, but she tells him to come back tomorrow. And so Indy leaves. Cue the bad guys. Moments after Indy leaves, Marion has a look at the piece she held onto. We see a guy named Major Arnold Tote walk in. He wants the exact same thing Indy came in for. Now, in terms of this movie, I couldn't really pinpoint who the main villain is exactly. I say this because the three guys you could point to as the main villains have a varying amount of presence. Belloq, for example, isn't the one in charge exactly. He's probably the main antagonist for Indy as a character, but the way the movie is presented, he doesn't come across as the main villain. It's sort of shared amongst three guys, and Major Tote is one of them. Tote is probably the most imposing villain for this one scene. Played by the late Ronald Lacey, the dude puts on this really creepy German accent. He has the vibe of the creepy kid at school, now an adult. It's an indicator that this guy is sinister. It's showing that he doesn't even opt to negotiate. As stated, he showed up with a group of thugs, gets them to pin Marion, and pulls a hot iron by the fireplace in order to get Marion to tell them where Abner's piece is. Normally, someone who looks sort of like Rick Moranis wouldn't be intimidating, but it's that touch that turns him into an imposing and ruthless villain. The villains in the Indiana Jones series are meant to be hateable, and right here, I'd say Arnold Tote is a great villain, easily one of the best in the series. This is Indy's first on-screen fight with goons in this movie, and I really admire the action here. Indy takes out each bad guy in a different way. For example, one guy gets caught on fire, and Indy shoots him right in the head. He takes out another guy when he's pinning Indy down by getting Marion to give him a whiskey bottle, which he uses to break himself free, right before the fire hits his face. Tote during all this notices the medallion Marion dropped, and tries to pick it up, but instead burns his hand from the heat and runs outside, plunging it in the snow to cool it off. After Marion shoots the last bad guy, she recovers the medallion, and she and Indy escape her place as it burns to the ground. This here is where Indy and Marion team up, and now they head to Cairo, where a lot of the movie happens. It's here where we meet one of Indy's friends, whom he has a lot of in the franchise, and the one that seems to appear to skip the movie that comes next. He was in this movie, was absent in Temple of Doom, appeared in Last Crusade, skipped out in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and now he's going to be in the dreaded Dial of Destiny, which I think will pretty much be his last on-screen appearance. It's like Sulla is allergic to even numbers or something. It's a weird observation I had. We know that they're only bringing Sulla back, because what else aren't they bringing back for cheap nostalgia? You want to see Indy fight Nazis again, just like the good old days, before Crystal Skull supposedly ruined the series? Because no, I don't want to see that. We've already had that in 2 movies made by better filmmakers. Dial of Destiny is going to be like The Force Awakens and pretend to solve everything, when in actuality, they'll just be repeating the mistakes of the sequel trilogy. Thankfully, Kathleen Kennedy will be out of the picture after Dial of Destiny reportedly. They might find someone worse, but that pest has been in charge for too long. Enough with the tangent though. Sulla is one of the most well-known supporting characters in the Indiana Jones franchise. He also appears in some expanded Indiana Jones adventures too. With that being said, Sulla is a Chad. He's a loyal friend to Indy and does a lot to assist him however he can at every turn. Our first extended interaction with Sulla and Indy is Sulla sitting down for a real discussion with them. After telling him he knows a guy who can help locate the Lost Ark, he makes his concern about the Ark of the Covenant clear. It's also here where Sulla mentions that Belloq from the opening of the movie is assisting the Nazis. Anyways, we are shown Indy and Marion out of town. I presume they're going on a walk given how they act. But since a movie with filler is a grand mistake, this ties into the main story, as Marion is carrying around a monkey shown in an earlier scene. The monkey is hinted at being aggressive, and then it runs off, and we see that the monkey actually has an allegiance to the bad guys. The monkey runs over to some shady looking dude with an eye patch. In this movie, appearances and personas sell everything. Of course, this leads to an action sequence with Indy and Marion being attacked by some thugs in town. Indy gets Marion to run, while he takes out the bad guys. But while fleeing, Marion gets carried away by a cart, in which she's now on her own. There's the classic frying pan smack out where Marion knocks out a guy with said item and drags his body inside, and then she proceeds to hide in a basket just before the bad guys show up. But since the monkey is aligned to the bad guys, the damn thing alerts the bad guys to Marion's location. There's the iconic scene where a swordsman confronts Indy, and he's like, "Let's fight," and is super ready for a classic sword fight. but Indy just pulls his gun and shoots him.
And it's gone.
What a way to surprise me. This actually wasn't supposed to be in the film, but Harrison Ford got a sore back while shooting, and so he just suggested just shooting the guy. That's one way to trim the runtime, but it's also an iconic and funny joke. Indy takes out a dude with a gun to save himself so much time. Indy then spends the next minute looking for Marion, as they got separated. He notices her being carried on a basket, and follows her and the bad guys to a truck. He shoots the drivers, which trips the truck over, and since the truck was loaded with explosive, the truck blows up as if Michael Bay was involved, and for the time being, Indy believes he just killed Marion. This death fake-out lasted for around 12 to 13 minutes. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if you guys remember The Rise of Skywalker, they fake-killed Chewie in the dumbest way. Like, apparently Chewie died in a separate transport that the good guys would have definitely seen, and then when the sad moment happens, in the very next scene he's shown to be alive, and you're like, what the hell? Besides, the death fake-out in Raiders is done well, because when Marion is revealed to be alive, it's not all hunky-dory, but we'll get to that when we get to that. When Indy believes Marion is dead, in the next scene, he goes to drink himself out, and the sorrow tone is done effectively. Accompanying him, of course, is that damn monkey to keep him company. It's here where Indy comes face to face with his arch rival, Belloq once again. Belloq, like earlier, is one smug motherfucker. We see that while the two are talking, guns are being passed around in the background. Belloq has that classic speech where he tells Indy that they are not so much different. It will only take a nudge to make them the same. Indy hardly responds to this. One of my favourite lines from Belloq in this movie is him talking about a watch he got for $10, which is next to worthless, but if he buries it in the sand for 1,000 years, it becomes priceless, which brings him to the Lost Ark. He tells Indy that the Ark is a transmitter to God, and Indy responds back with a spat. If it's God they want to see, they'll go see him together right here, right now. Until everyone in the bar pulls a gun on him. You think he's dead, but Sulla's kids show up to surround him, and so Belloq lets him off, telling him it'll take more than children to save him next time. Sulla comes to pick him up to the guy he knows, but still, this isn't the end of the bad guys trying to kill Indy, as the eye patch guy follows them. And it's here where it's established that the Nazis are digging in the wrong place, given they only have a rough measurement for the location of the Ark. When Indy and Sulla discover through Sulla's friend what the medallion is saying, that being a warning not to disturb the Ark, and the other side saying that there needs to be a staff attached to the medallion of the correct size for the medallion to work properly, in the meanwhile, the eye patch guy poisons the food, which before Indy eats, is caught by Sulla as they see the monkey got a taste too, and it killed him. When watching the scene, the poisoned food was on my mind, and you're just hoping that Indy doesn't eat it. This, of course, is where the really exciting stuff happens. We cut to the Nazi dig site in Cairo. Belloq and Colonel Dietrich, another one of the villains who is the guy in charge of the excavation. This is where we finally meet the three villains as a whole. Dietrich is probably the least prominent of the three main villains. This is why I said this movie doesn't really have a prominent key, absolute main villain. To describe Dietrich, he's a douche. He and Belloq argue a lot, and that's his character. We've pretty much reached the halfway point of the movie, and I have to say it holds up extremely well. It's a great adventure story, with a clear goal, memorable characters, whether they be likable or hateable. Anyways, Indy and Sulla go to the map room, which is supposed to tell you the location of the Lost Ark. Indy goes down with his whip, and it's here where we get one of the movie's most iconic scenes. Indy is supposed to put the staff in a certain place. Sulla is unfortunately taken away, but finds his way back up to help hoist Indy up later. John Williams' score peaks as Indy is searching for the correct spot to place the staff, just as 9 AM rolls around. We see visually Indy work this all out, and when he places the staff in the right place, the light directs him towards the correct location. And in its full glory, Indy has essentially discovered the location of the titular Lost Ark. A great moment in this film, and definitely one of the highlights. Indy breaks the staff and climbs up. Sulla serves as a distraction while Indy searches around, and it's here where Indy realizes Marion is still alive, though gagged and tied up. Indy realizes that he can't free her right now because that will draw the attention of the Nazis. Indy pins out the location of Lost Ark and plans to dig it up. We see meanwhile that Belloq is ordered by Dietrich to question Marion, and we also get reintroduced to Toad, who shows his hand that kind of healed from the burn, but now he's got the thing burnt onto his flesh. Indy, Sulla, and friends meanwhile dig up the location of the Ark, all the way into nighttime, where all the Nazis and their workers stop to sleep for the night. I like these guys thinking, get the Ark before the Nazis do, and what a better time to get the Ark out of there than to do it when they're all sleeping. We of course cut to Marion untied by Belloq. Belloq apologizes for how the Nazis thus far have treated her and gives her some food and water. This here is where we see Belloq as a charmer, almost like Indiana Jones himself. A random fact about Belloq: he engaged in the act of plagiarism. Yeah, it says on the Indiana Jones wiki, quote, Belloq eventually came across a paper on stratigraphy by Jones and plagiarized the work. As a result, he was awarded the Archaeological Society Prize, with Jones unable to prove the theft. Damn, our boy Belloq committed plagiarism. Not only did he steal the idol from Indy, but also his thoughts and opinions and passed it off as his own. I thought I might as well mention that, because that's what my channel is about. Stealing the hard work from others and passing it off as my own. Anyways, Marion plays that drinking game with Belloq and tries to use that as an opportunity to escape. But of course, Toad is there to ruin the day. Right afterwards, Indy and Sulla carry the Ark of the Covenant, and I especially like the lighting here. It gives the feeling of a gold majestic item. While carrying the Ark back up, Belloq and the Nazis intercept what Indy is up to. As always, Belloq taunts Indy at taking something he briefly possessed, this time, the Ark of the Covenant. As a villain, Belloq is always one step ahead of Indy. It's that common villain trope of always beating the hero to something, and it's done well here. Dietrich, however, comes in, telling Indy that they're gonna bury him in there, but he will also have some company down there, before getting Toad to throw Marion in, much to the surprise and dismay of Belloq. Yeah, maybe the one redeemable thing about Belloq. He's not happy about Marion getting thrown down, and now it's up to Indy and Marion to escape. Despite having a great phobia of snakes, he is able to improvise. He uses his whip to climb up one of the statues and tip it over onto the wall, which it breaks open. With that, they can escape. We see that the Ark is about to be loaded onto a plane. The next comes one of the most iconic set pieces. And yeah, I know that this whole movie is iconic, but this is one of the most iconic of the scenes. Take a shot for every time I say iconic. This is the classic fistfight scene with a bigger, tougher guy. In the original Indiana Jones trilogy, he was played by the late Pat Roach, playing different characters. In this movie, he plays two characters. He first played one of Toad's goons from Nepal, and in this scene, he plays the more memorable muscular mechanic. He has quite the entrance too. He comes out of a hut, witnesses Indy fist-fighting a mechanic, and smiles, indicating he wants to join the party. Marion joins in too, knocking out the pilot, who plants his head on some of the controls that cause the plane to start moving. Marion herself, though, gets trapped in the cockpit. Also, some gasoline spills, and it's extremely reactive as a set piece, with one event affecting another, and this makes the whole sequence more believable, even if the fist fight in the middle of all of this is really hammy with the sound effects. Eventually though, the muscular mechanic eventually finds out what a propeller does to the human body and gets cut into bits. While not shown, his blood splatters on the ship, and you can just piece together how graphic it would have been. Anyways, Indy frees Marion from the cockpit, and they bolt out of there just in time. Despite slowing the Nazis down, they're not gonna stop there, and thus we get the next set piece. Indy and Marion meet up with Sulla, who informs them on their enemy's backup plan. They're going to load a truck convoy to get the Ark out of Egypt, so Indy's got to stop them and recover the Lost Ark. So he gets on a horse and chases after the convoy. Once again, John Williams' score is brilliant. During this action sequence, Indy hijacks the truck with the Ark on it, and evades the Nazis either trying to shoot him or trying to rip control away from him. In the latter, there were Nazis in the back of the truck he was driving, who try to make their way to the driver's seat. Indy gets the truck to brush up against some leaves to knock over the bad guys. One of them actually does manage to land a lucky hit on Indy, although it isn't fatal. In terms of being an action hero, Indy always seems to be on the more vulnerable side, like John McClane, although not as realistic. It may take Indy some time to take out the bad guys, but he comes out of every encounter relatively fine at least. The last Nazi actually manages to take control away from Indy, at least briefly, and knock him off the truck, but Indy demonstrates his whip again. Due to wearing leather, he is able to not scrape his flesh all over the ground when recovering his footing. This part of the movie is clearly meant to raise tension in the audience at a movie theatre. I imagine people watching this when this first came out were gasping for Indy's safety. Indy manages to get back on the truck and push the guy out, in which we see the guy getting flattened by the truck, although it's shot in an off-screen angle. Indy eventually manages to lose the bad guys, and for now, the Ark is safe in American hands. We cut to later that night, where Sulla tells Indy about how he's got a smuggler friend named Captain Katanga, who will help Indy and Marion smuggle the Ark out of Egypt. Indy says a heartfelt goodbye to Sulla, and it's done really well. Given this is the first Indy movie, and they didn't know whether or not they'd have a franchise on their hands, this is potentially the last time we see this character. Marion also kisses Sulla as a form of thanks. The film goes into its climax phase effectively. The next scene has Marion and Indy rekindle their relationship on Captain Katanga's smuggling vessel. I don't have a lot to say about this scene. It's just a nice little scene to show their relationship recover. Again, very iffy how it started, but they fully made up by this point. But the Nazis show up to take the Ark away, and Indy is forced to hide, while Marion is captured again. The Nazis decide to spare Captain Katanga and his crew, and Indy makes his way over to the Nazi U-boat, much to the applause of the smuggling crew. It's a small moment, but it shows us how far Indy is willing to go for Marion. The U-boat travels to an island somewhere in the Aegean Sea. Belloq intends to demonstrate the power of the Ark on this island before bringing it to Da Fura. On the island, Indy disguises himself as one of the Nazis. In a scene that was filmed in the exact same location as the Jawas capture R2 scene from A New Hope, Indy appears from up a hill and threatens to blow the Ark up. In Belloq's last on-screen interaction with Indy, he knows that Indy doesn't have it in him to destroy a historical artifact, and Indy knows it too. He abandons the idea of blowing up the Lost Ark, and so he too is captured. This part I really like. It demonstrates how Belloq knows Indy too much to be fooled by him. It's like at the start of the movie where Belloq took the golden idol from Indy. He knew he'd be there to deliver the idol straight to him unwillingly. Nevertheless, Indy and Marion end up being tied up on a post, while the bad guys do their ritual. The Nazis have got stock cameras and the whole shebang to demonstrate the power of the Ark. At first, when it's opened, it's nothing but sand inside. But immediately after, guess what happens next? The power of the Ark deactivates all the machinery around, and the spirits of the Lost Ark start to take shape. Indy throughout all this has a realization. He cannot look at the Lost Ark. He tells Marion to keep her eyes shut, as he does the same. You might be wondering why, and the film never really explains it. It's just that Indy knows that the Ark in this moment is not meant to be looked at. Fortunately, Belloq and friends didn't realize this. They stare at the Ark spirits in all its glory, and it turns into their downfall. The spirits of the Lost Ark turn evil, resulting in the three main bad guys screaming their asses off in torment. On top of all the extras being evaporated by a supernatural beam, and we get these really cool special effects. First, Dietrich's head shrinks, Toad's head melts off, and Belloq's head explodes. The most impressive of which is undoubtedly the melting head. I watched a featurette about it on the Raiders of the Lost Ark DVD, and Spielberg talks about how he too was impressed. It might be one of the best effects in the whole series. If you haven't seen the movie a million times like I have, it's pure shock value. Something different, yet graphic for each villain. Apparently they even had to cover up Belloq's exploding head with fire so they could get the appropriate rating they wanted. With the demise of all the bad guys, the Ark closes after the ghosts have had some time going around the island. We even see that the bodies are all sucked up, presumably to God. When all of this ends, Indian and Marion open their eyes, discovering that their rope is burnt off, and they're free to go home. We cut to Washington, D.C., in which Indy is told by the American agents that the Ark is to be moved to an undisclosed location to be researched by, quote, top men. While unsatisfactory for Indy, he was rewarded, and walks away with Marion. The last shot we see of the Lost Ark ever is it being moved to a warehouse with a ton of other crates, then cue the credits. Damn. Rewatching the movie for the millionth time and it's still entertaining. Now I remember why I watched all 4 of these movies on repeat all the time. To sum it up, it's a golden main character, memorable set pieces, an interesting story with interesting mythology, great supporting characters, effective hateable villains, and an overall idol in cinema. I gotta hand it to Lucas and Spielberg for making this movie and giving us the Indiana Jones franchise. Despite many areas of the film's production being rocky, they got their shit together and made a movie that started an extremely popular trilogy, an underappreciated 4th entry, and is now going to be corporatized with Disney having their shot at making a 5th movie. I've made it clear that I have no hope for the Dial of Destiny, but it will no doubt have its supporters, with people claiming that it saved the Indy franchise, when in actuality it did no such thing. Time travel will just be a lame excuse to bring back all of the iconic shit with the least amount of effort, and due to what the leaks said, I'm completely writing it off in terms of it being any good. I will of course review it, but beyond that, the days of Indy being an unruined franchise is numbered. Maybe the Bethesda Indiana Jones game will be good, but aside from that, I'm dreading Disney getting their dirty hands on Indy. It's a miracle that they left it alone for as long as they did, but now the dark times are upon us. But for this movie, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark gets a solid 9.7 out of 10, one of the highest honors I can bestow a film. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain.